Okay. Thank you everyone for coming to our week 11 general meeting. What I found, I found this article earlier about the largest rooftop solar system in Europe that was installed on, I thought very interesting just the fact that it's a manufacturing site, but specifically it was on an Audi factory. At the bottom there, I've got some of the like stats of how much energy it's producing a year. But I thought it was cool. It's what they say in 2012, it started getting most of its heat from geothermal. So this factory's been pretty green for quite a while. And I think they said this is like the second of 5 Audi factories in Europe that is like focusing on this green energy and is using solar power. So I think it's kind of cool. It's also worth noting, so they say they are carbon neutral. That doesn't necessarily take into the fact that they are producing cars. So they're definitely doing a very good thing. I just think that's kind of an interesting thing to balance when you're looking at a company going green. It's what their background is or what they're doing. But yeah. So 2 things. We're going to talk about the communications chair nominations and the debates. So this should be titled, I'm sorry, because I forgot to send out the nominations poll. It is still, I put it out yesterday, and it's going to be open basically as long as people are sending in nominations. You can also nominate yourself. That is not dependent on whether you are a full member or a like a new member. Basically, if you are accepted to a position, you will have to pay dues next semester, but that's really the only thing we are counting on. But yeah, so that is in the Slack. So definitely please nominate yourself or nominate some other people. So for the debates, actually, I'm going to say before we even start, the reason we are doing these debates is because we have volunteered as an organization to run these debates for the I don't know if you guys did when I took it, it was called RIT Year 1. It's now called RIT 365, but it's basically the freshman kind of like onboarding class. And they're making it more about like experiences on campus rather than these are where each of these resources are, and this is how you access these resources. So we did 2 of them in September. I think they actually went really well. We got these kids talking. Shouldn't say kids, some of you are freshmen. But we got them talking. We started interesting conversations, things that people didn't think about. So it was actually a really cool setup. So we wanted to go through it with you guys as well, and kind of reenact those debates, and hopefully interest you guys in potentially volunteering to host these debates for those classes. So
I will note just so you can kind of plan ahead if you decide that you're interested. Our next debate is on November 10th at 5 p.m. and that is fully virtual.
And don't stress about writing that down right now because I have that on the last slide as well.
Oh, sorry.
Really good. So basically the format of what we want to do is we want to have 2 mini debates on topics that have been predetermined. We want to do 10 to 15 minutes. Basically, we can feel it out, see how much time we need. Of prep time, you can do research, whatever research you want. And then we'll have 6 to 8 minutes of debate time, which will be timed. And yeah, we should make sure we know who is going to be saying what components. And then after the actual debate, we're just gonna sit down and have a conversation about each one and see what we learned and what we disagreed with. But yeah, and we realized that the 2 topics we picked might not be, you guys might have more experience with these topics because you are interested in sustainability, but everyone has their own focus. So if you aren't familiar with these at all, that is totally fine. And we'll all learn something out of this, I hope. So this is the first topic we picked on small nuclear reactors. These are getting a lot more popular. If you guys haven't, I know a lot of you guys are mechy, if not like everyone. But they will definitely talk about this in mechy. Nuclear is a really up and coming technology, especially in sustainability. And there's definitely arguments on both sides. So the plan is, this will be the format of the debate, an initial argument, and then a rebuttal against things that the other side brought up. And then we can just kind of have a group discussion after that. So any questions? Okay, so the plan now is I am going to stick people into breakout rooms. 3, 2, and it looks like it's gonna assign automatically. Actually, no, because I need to title the rooms. Name. So one of these rooms is going to be titled Pro, and the other one's going to be titled Con, and that will tell you what side of the debate you are on. Because now we have 7. Actually, I don't think it matters. I was going to say because we have 7 people, we can still do 4 and 3. So I'm just going to assign people, every other person, to a room. Okay, so I'm gonna open the rooms and I'm gonna set a timer for 10 minutes, but Catherine, you're in a different room than me, so you let me know on Slack if you guys do or don't want more time.
Sounds good.
Okay, ready? Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to, where is my, I have way too many windows open. I am going to start a timer, and it will be, I mean, honestly, you know what? I take it back. I'm not going to do a timer. I don't think we need it. But I am going to just, yeah, so I guess just pro team, you guys can just kind of have at it.
Okay. So first off, they have extremely low carbon energy source that doesn't emit greenhouse gases. It can be produced in a factory. So it's better accessibility to a larger number of communities rather than having one facility. Makes it more accessible. It's easier to transport and repair. And there's more standardization across the board, making it safer. It's already implemented in 30 different countries and accounts for 11% of the total energy sources in the world. So it is already proven successful.
Okay. I'm going to talk for the con team. So first off, there's a very common knowledge of all the harm that nuclear energy has done for the world, such as bombs in World War II, as well as specifically 2 nuclear reactors, Fukushima in Japan. So not only is there that danger of this catastrophic event, there is the social aspect that you have to deal with as well, in convincing people to have these reactors in their communities, especially if you're going to have modular nuclear, you're going to have more smaller sites, which increases your risk of things going wrong because you have more of these sites. It's also just more difficult to implement because of that social aspect. People will not want nuclear close to them. Aside from that, nuclear waste has the potential to spread and to release this radiation into water. So initially, nuclear waste is contained underwater for 5 years and then is stored in deeper ground. Nuclear is also not technically a completely renewable energy source, whereas solar and wind are, so those could be seen as potentially better options. Nuclear is also extremely expensive in the initial capital costs. And I don't know this for sure, you could argue that when you have more of these sites, it's potentially going to raise the cost dramatically. Also, not only when you're building a nuclear site, when you are retiring a nuclear site, there's not as much regulation, so you have to worry again about that containment. And that's all we had. So pro team, and this can kind of be open discussion if you have any issues with what we talked about.
Well, on the topic of nuclear kind of harm of nuclear meltdowns, especially when you talk about Fukushima, which that is a very bad thing that happened. And although it didn't affect too many people, it does pose the risk of nuclear reactors having large effects, as we've seen, especially with Chernobyl. But there have been major developments on not only like prevention against tsunami damage, prevention against XYZ damage, but also kind of different organizations around the world who develop and manufacture these nuclear reactors come together in WANO, World Association of Nuclear Operators, who kind of work together to build more strategically safe and efficient nuclear reactors.
Yeah, and I will say to that as well, small nuclear reactors actually address a lot of those issues because unlike traditional ones, they can be built underground, which reduce a lot of the issues with being susceptible to natural disasters, as in the case of Fukushima. And also, just because something has been used for bad things in the past, as a general technology, doesn't mean it can't be used for good uses. And it's the job of engineers to make sure that those technologies are used for responsible uses. And overall, it would make converting to renewable energy actually a lot easier because it slots in very well for traditional coal-fired power plants. And it's would overall be cheaper to get a lot more of our energy from nuclear than renewables, as shown by how Germany and France both attempted to go carbon neutral. And Germany currently gets 51.9% of its energy from renewables, which is great, but they've spent a lot more money on it than France, which gets 75% of its cumulative energy from nuclear power, while meanwhile, spending less on it and already reducing its emissions by more than Germany has, presumably due to that.
So I'm trying to think what I want to reply. I think it still doesn't negate the issue of nuclear not necessarily being a viable long-term solution, because you still have to deal with that waste. Help me out, guys. I got not a lot.
Well, there's plus like extracting and refining the materials for the radioactive cores is not the most environmentally friendly or sustainable practices. And also building a plant underground can still lead to leaching and in groundwater, and it can spread still while being underground. And then using nuclear and just putting it in place of coal in traditional infrastructure, I mean, yes, for the short term it helps making things more renewable, but the long term it doesn't help because it still maintains the coal infrastructure, which is not helpful for the advancement in solar or wind or hydroelectric power, because there's still the infrastructure is not in place for those other sources of energy. So we're kind of by then you're just kind of back to square one, where the same place you were when you were still using coal and trying to switch over.
What was I going to say? Oh my gosh. Oh, I was going to say, I would also note that even if the technology has improved quite a bit, it only takes one small thing to go wrong to have absolutely catastrophic effects. So even if technology has improved, technology will never be 100% foolproof. Any other thoughts from anyone?
Just kind of to respond to your last point there, since they are smaller, the modules can be independently managed. So the maintenance and the refueling outage can be done in a more controlled environment. So it's taking away from some of those safety risks.
Yeah, and in terms of current nuclear safety, overall nuclear, if you're considering a replace, because currently the grid can't support renewable infrastructure, and so we could either keep releasing carbon emissions while trying to upgrade it to accommodate renewable energy, or we could sub in nuclear in the interim and actually significantly reduce our carbon emissions to meet the goals required of us. And as for the safety of that decision, nuclear is far more tightly regulated than the fossil fuel industry. And like in terms of cumulative deaths has resulted in far less. So I'd say overall, it's the safer than the status quo until we can actually get renewables completely online.
I agree with you guys. I'm pro-nuclear. Just saying. I am definitely not against nuclear. I think it's a very critical technology that needs to, and I think likely will be adopted in the coming decades, I guess I would say. I don't think it's going to be like an overnight. I mean, I will say it's true. It's an extremely expensive technology. So it definitely will not happen overnight, but I do think it's going to be something that will expand in the next couple decades. So I'm curious, does anyone else, like Jimmy and John, are you guys pro or con?
I'm pro, but like I'm kind of worried that like, oh, like people, like especially people who are against renewables, like once they're convinced to go with nuclear, they'll be like, oh, problem solved. And then just kind of forget about other renewables, which like you can't do really. Like it's not like kind of like the silver bullet. Like it's not gonna fix all the problems. But I think like, yeah, like what Eli said, like it's better than the status quo. I 100% agree with that. Like it's way better than fossil fuels. And it also it fits in with the current infrastructure, which I think is like one of the cons against renewable energy sources is like it doesn't, like not only do you have to change energy sources, but you have to change like entire infrastructures, which is a lot more of a process than just changing like a one power source.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with John. I think it's definitely a double-edged sword. And I think the main, like one of the top problems with nuclear is management. Like managed well, it can be a really, really good tool, but it can also be really destructive. So like everything else. Yeah.
It's actually kind of interesting. One of the arguments I was making is kind of actually, well, it's not incorrect, but it's not the full story. When you talk about the social aspects, I read a paper for this, and you guys probably are taking or will take contemporary issues if you're Mechis. But people who live near nuclear reactors are 100% on board with nuclear, partially because they understand it, and it's a great source of jobs for local communities, and they have very little issues with it, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't heard that side of it.
Oops, I clicked that. Actually, are we good to move on to the next one, or does anyone else have anything about nuclear? Okay. So the next one we have is talking about offshore wind. This is generally more often talked about in sustainability. There's, I mean, I personally, when I think about this topic, I have a couple things that I think of off the top of my head. But I think it'll be interesting to see if we can dig into it and find any other arguments for or against. So I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to delete the rooms, and I'm going to make new ones. And I'm going to do people randomly, but not with the same groups. Okay. Sorry, this will take 2 minutes. Okay. I'm gonna open these. We got another 10 minutes and then we'll take the rest of the time to debate and discuss. And here we go. Okay. We are gonna get started with the pro team giving us their primary points.
So I guess just for the basics, offshore wind energy is obviously it's a renewable energy source. It's taking advantage of a natural energy source that does not hurt the environment. And the fact that it's offshore means we get to take advantage of like high wind speeds from ocean breezes, which is also good. And it helps that you can build it offshore because it doesn't increase the likelihood of building it on land and complicating current land infrastructure. The fact that you can build it offshore means it's kind of farther away from other things and it's a little more spacious. And the fact that you can build it offshore means it can be better accessible for coastal towns, which need the energy.
All right, you want me to go for it? Cool. So we were talking about how the Cape Wind project has a lot of regular issues with windmills, like visual, like aesthetic wise. There's a lot of noise pollution. There's bird deaths. Obviously, that's a standard one. And also the costs of this are really expensive. So it's super difficult to like sustain over a long period of time. And there's also an impact on the local marine animals, which is not understood because of the noise. And it's supposed to, there's an argument saying that it's going to drive away fisheries and such. And then from the social perspective, it doesn't really help make any jobs, although there's some renewable energy. And it was also built on Native American land. And so the Native Americans of that area were really not happy with their land just being taken for this. And this also, in a broader perspective, only works for coastal areas and in European countries where there's a lot of wind. If you went more into the Midwestern US, it wouldn't really work. And it's not sustainable overall if you look at the geography of different kinds of places. Also, the wind itself in the coastal areas is unreliable depending on the season. So even there, the wind production of the energy production because of the wind is kind of offset by the cost. So is there really a benefit there in terms of the cost is a really big debated question, especially dependent on the area.
All right, arguments from the pro team to the con team.
Okay, well, with regard to, let's see, environmental impact and like bird deaths, so environmental impact, like, it's been cited that, there's stuff like noise pollution and physical disturbances and that they're not well understood, but there have been studies conducted that show that the physical disturbances from construction actually level off with time and that they can actually become environmentally beneficial since they're normally built in sediment-rich habitats. The pillars on which they're constructed provide a base for fish species and different benthic species to root themselves. And also bird deaths. There's been a kind of mixed study showing that bird deaths can be mitigated by like painting or illuminating the tips of the turbines. And more research definitely needs to be done to that as well. As for like disrupting the view, turbines can increase ecotourism to an area. So that could potentially offset the, issues with that. Also, that's kind of like a subjective thing. The Native American thing though, did not actually end up reading about that, but they should definitely be consulted before implementing any sort of project like this.
Okay, arguments from the con team to the pro.
I will say there are other places that have been successful for having wind turbines in this specific area. So typically they are implemented along the highway, which is fairly close to the water's edge. So you're still having those high wind life. It's also more accessible for repair, and you wouldn't need to worry about that invasive construction aspect since it's in a more remote area.
Okay, this part is just open for open discussion.
I have a thing. I was supposed to be on the con team, but I researched it, or the pro team, but I researched the con for rebuttal. But since we didn't mention it, did we mention Bett's law? I don't think we've mentioned it. So Bett's law states that the best efficiency of a wind turbine you can get is about a little less than 60%. And then this article shows like a typical turbine that has a top efficiency of only 50%. It sort of tapers off after a certain wind speed. And it only gets to the maximum power output after a certain wind speed as well. So it requires a lot of wind speed, but not too much. Like it doesn't want too much. So
Would that be something you could potentially engineer around? Maybe, I don't know.
just for that specific model though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I guess as sort of a rebuttal to my teammate there, I think that doesn't necessarily negate its usefulness because a lot of energy like generation sources aren't actually that efficient. Like I think the best coal plants are only around like, I think Colin said like 60 something percent efficient. And so it just depends on where it's useful as opposed to like how efficient it is in, its application, because there are still a lot of areas that could benefit from it tremendously, just like how solar is. I think they said it was like top efficiency was like 30%, but a lot of places still get great benefit from it.
Yeah, I agree.
I couldn't remember the numbers, so I just looked it up. I mean, for comparison, solar, it's a good solar panel is at like 25% max efficiency.
Yeah, there's a lot of thermal there. Okay.
So which side are you guys like actually on? Are you pro or con? Pro or against, rather?
I mean, I'm personally pro. I was just on the cons. I researched the cons.
Yeah, I feel, and you guys kind of touched on this. I think every area or every geographic area specifically has their like whatever renewable is best suited to that area. So I think this could be a very like a fantastic energy source on in coastal areas. Although actually nuclear could be a really great source in coastal areas too, because you have that water coolant. But yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm pro, but I do think like with the issue about the Native American communities, it is important to have the support of local communities before you implement a technology that they may or may not want.
On the flip side, though, they also create jobs, just like the nuclear power plants.
The problem with that, though, was that the jobs weren't going to locals and that all of the money was going overseas or would have been going overseas.
Okay. I think like both are here to stay. It's just about how you actually make them sustainable or more sustainable than they already are.
There was
Yeah,
a
and
like a documentary about Norwegian wind turbines and how they use them. I think those kinds of areas really benefit from that.
mhm. Yeah, and with regard to that, I think like if you implement technology, even if it's, you know, something that's generally good in an irresponsible way, it can sour people's opinions to it and hurt, you know, what good it can do overall.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. Any other thoughts?
I think these are a little less controversial than recycling, the one we did last semester.
Was that what it was? I wasn't sure. We have and I can show you actually. I'll go to the slide now. The topics that we have for the 365 event with the freshman classes are GMOs, offshore wind, and ecotourism, which we didn't pick those. Those are left over from last year. So we're definitely open to doing different topics. I think those three work because they're generally, I don't think people know a ton about them, but I think there is a general basic understanding of those three topics. And I mean, I was actually really surprised how much we were able to research in like 10 minutes. So yeah, when we did it with the freshmen, they had about 10 to 15 minutes as well. So actually, what do you guys think would be other like good topics to do for this?
We might have done this last year too, but electric vehicles is a good one and still pretty relevant.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a pretty good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Recycling actually is a good one just because of like how much that's changed in the last however many years.
Hey, Sarah, can you briefly explain what offshore wind and ecotourism are?
Well, offshore wind is what we just did.
Okay.
And ecotourism is specifically like kind of when people will travel to certain areas kind of to appreciate the ecosystem there, but it doesn't necessarily have a beneficial effect. So like an example of that was that we talked about in September when we were doing these. The Galapagos Islands have quite a lot of ecotourism, which is seen as a good thing because people are understanding the biodiversity of the islands. They are appreciating that nature. But also, the more people that come to the islands, like they have to shut off areas. They can't. I took a class on the Galapagos last semester, so my professor said that you used to be able to take a boat and go basically anywhere you want. But now I think it's within Ecuador, the government has limited what routes people are allowed to take through the Galapagos to protect areas that are basically deteriorating due to this tourism. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It's also related to what's it called? We talked about it at the conference last year. I think it's called voluntourism. So it's like when like students will go on a volunteer trip to like some like trying to I'm not gonna explain it well. I'll just leave you with that word, to be honest, because I don't understand it 100%.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
But yeah, so yeah, Catherine mentioned this before. It is a Tuesday from 5 to 5:50 over Zoom. I actually thought it went really well last time. I know Shreya and Catherine and John all participate in that. And yeah, I think it went pretty well. But if anyone is interested in volunteering for that, We have all the slides laid out and everything. We basically just have one meeting beforehand to kind of show you the ropes of how to lead this for those classes. But yeah, if you're interested, feel free to reach out over Slack. Or if you just have any other ideas of topics, let us know. Yeah, any questions, comments? Cool. All right, well, thank you guys for coming. We definitely went overtime, but I think we had some good conversations. So see you guys next week, and I wish you luck on any other tests you have.
That's good. Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.